an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Travelers, Season 1, Episode 10, Kathryn. In this episode, I really had hoped that they were going to try and let Kathryn in on the secret, but it appears that is not an option. So instead, they gaslight her into thinking it never happened, and also drug her. And oh, Kathryn, I'm so sorry, sweetie. This sucks for you. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. First of all, huge thank you to Michael for commissioning this episode. Michael, I appreciate you, buddy, out here in the pinch. I really loved this episode because I feel like this is the first time we get to see a lot of what the future is capable of. It's interesting to have the juxtaposition of the technology they have access to and the abilities that they now, like, for healing, medicine, but also knowing that it's absolute garbage in the future and everything is falling apart and everybody is dying and there is cave-ins and cancer and fucking who knows what else. So, it's tempting to be like, wow, in the future they have awesome stuff, but no, they don't. It's terrible. Michael's here in the chat. Hi, Michael. And Anya's here. Hi, Anya's. This episode really was a lot. It was a relentless rush of panic. It's just our team desperately trying to contain a situation that has gotten so out of hand so quickly. And while I totally understand McClaren wanting to save his wife's life, he has grown affectionate towards her. It is not her fault that she got mixed up in this whole thing. There is also an implication that maybe it would have been better for her if she died, because now they are going to have to so tightly control every movement, watch her and all of her assumptions about things. I can't help but wonder if she is going to be she's starting to think she's losing her mind. She's experiencing such self-doubt that she is telling other people, oh, you know what? Don't listen to me. I sound crazy. And it's like, we know that she's on the right track. We know. And I feel like a life in which people around you are constantly colluding to lie to you is just not worth it. I don't know. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that they manage to convince her in a way that is comforting or somehow helpful. And that that they can move forward and she can begin to, either build out a life for herself that doesn't include this new McClaren whom she doesn't know, and find some sort of satisfaction there. Or maybe she gets a divorce entirely and separates herself from this situation. I don't know if McClaren is allowed to get a divorce. What kinds of options are open to travelers once they inhabit the lives of a person that was supposed to die? Can they make those kinds of decisions? For example, if Trevor was in college, could the traveler inside Trevor choose a new major and completely drop out of college if he wanted? Could he do there is a point at which you're acting totally out of character, sure, but there's also, the possibility of somebody just going in a different direction with their life. I feel like staying in a marriage that doesn't seem to be working and behaving like a different person is ultimately probably worse than getting a divorce. But I don't really know if there is a sort of understanding of what direction they can go in with the position in which that traveler finds themselves originally. Like, can they make use of Karen somehow? And that's why or Kathryn, so they want to keep her in the loop because they feel like that could be advantageous eventually. I don't know if that even matters, you know? So anyway, let's start this episode. Kathryn is freaking out in the back of the van, does not understand who these people are. She didn't see McClaren get taken away by medics, so she thinks that he's still there and that they have just abandoned him. They are driving away past a series of ambulances and police cars, which are heading in the opposite direction. And eventually, they have to drug her to calm her down because she is just screaming. And it is a really tough thing to know that these people are, honestly, they kind of want the best for her. And that might sound generous because we know that they could ultimately be like used against her. But in this moment, it's not like any of these travelers is not an empathetic person, right? Like and that is something that I would be interested to see. We haven't had this happen yet, but if there's a traveler who inhabits somebody's body who's genuinely like kind of cruel and does not give a shit about other people, there are selfish travelers. And we've seen travelers who seem to be sort of traumatized by their missions, and they wind up turning into crueler versions of themselves. But what about somebody who's just awful? Did they do screening to try and keep those people out? But the ones that we're friends with, the ones on our team, they don't want to hurt her. That's not, you know, but she doesn't know that. She doesn't know what the fuck is happening here. So they are debating whether or not McClaren could even have made it out of there alive. Like, there are these, they start talking about how the EMTs had to be some of them. And they all put it together that, like, yeah, this whole thing with the using the paddles to resuscitate Bishop and Kathryn, there was going to need to be somebody on site to do that. So, you know, this is obviously their own team that has scooped him up and taken him away. And while Marcy is saying she doesn't think that he could even have survived, Carly's like, well, they obviously think he could because they came and got him. So Carly gets a call, or Marcy gets a call, clean up the mess you've created and we'll talk about the next steps. And honestly, when they said clean up the mess you created, I kind of thought that they meant kill Kathryn. That is the tone to me. And they are very nonspecific in the phone call. And I am wondering if after all the effort they have put in, they're going to find out that's exactly what that person meant. And they're watching these people do these like convoluted tap dances to try and create a storyline. And they were just like, no, we just thought you should kill her. But, you know, then it remains how to kill her so that it looks like she died in the crash. The whole thing, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So Kathryn is brought home and they put her on the bed, and Marcy injects her with a memory inhibitor, which is apparently something that all the traveler medics carry with them all the time, like a couple doses of it, because they just never know when they're going to have to handle a situation of somebody seeing something that they shouldn't have, yada, yada, yada. So they are setting a scene in the house that makes it look as if they had some big party. All of this wine is like being dumped down the drain and the empty bottles are being left out. There's wine like spilled on the sides of the counter. They put out like wine and cheese and make it look like this was like, you know, an event. But the thing is, as much as there is this evidence of this party that they are creating, it doesn't look genuine, right? Like, there's the cheese and the crackers and everything are set out so neatly. There's no crumbs. There's no like smears of cheese because it's like a soft cheese. It would be like, you know, cut into and smeared up and broken. Also, if it was left out overnight, which is the implication here, it would be very dried out. There would be rings on the coffee table or the other tables left from the wine glasses. There would be just an overall sense of what's the word I want? Just sort of messiness that isn't really there. Now, she seems to buy it because she says something like, I woke up to a disaster of a kitchen, which made me fucking cackle because that bitch does not know what a disaster of a kitchen looks like, apparently. Bitch, sit down. Y'all don't know how to party if that is a disaster of a kitchen to you. Get your life. But it's fine. So they wind up tracking down McClaren. He is in the, in their, what do you call it? Sort of warehouse. And they have a wing that is set up with sterile equipment, and it's got like a drop sort of clear window. I'm trying to think of the word I want. It's like a clear curtain to keep them separated from contaminants and everything. Honestly, the setup is pretty legit. Like, it's impressive for the amount of time that they were given. So originally, when they come in, because they were not informed about how this is going to work. This doctor, whose name is Derek, they are apparently normally reserved for heads of state, which was their first mission. But he says now we save whomever the director tells us to save worldwide. And this is an interesting thing, like the heads of state thing. And later he talks about how I need to save the life of a genocidal dictator. And they're like, why? And he says, because apparently he's better than the alternative. Again, what do we know about the fucking director? Like, there is no doubt in my mind that there is a time and a place for certain people to die so that it is most advantageous. So it's possible he has to save the life of this dictator in order to kill that dictator at a better point that will open more opportunities. That's certainly possible, but it's not a guarantee. I do not trust this director. I do not know what their ultimate goal is. They seem to be asserting, well, we're trying to avoid these like enormous disasters. Can I ask why, I should even believe that some of these enormous disasters are even going to happen? Like, are they being fed truth at all? Like, it's just, there's so much about this that could just be invented. And there's so much about what they're doing that could be small potatoes that doesn't actually have that big an effect on everything as a whole. Now, there are enough travelers that I feel that's probably not true. That there are enough of them that probably they are making some big effects. But it's really difficult to tell. And like the fact that things have started to get worse in the past is interesting because it's clearly showing that their assumptions of the effects their work will have are completely off base when you're dealing with a time like it's supposed to be how far ahead of where we are now? 100 years? More than 100 years? I mean, this is a really weird scale of time to go back and try and change things and just hope. It's not like I go back in time 10 years and try and pull and tuck a couple of things. This is 100 years changing enormous moments, and who the fuck knows? And eventually, it looks like Trevor's kind of having some doubts because he says that he's starting to see that time is a river, and you can throw a rock in the river, but it's just going to keep flowing around the rock like the rock's not even there, and it won't matter. And I'm wondering how much of that he's going to internalize and keep with him. Because that's a pretty serious doubt to have. If you really get to a point where you're sort of like, does this matter? Yikes. That's undermining a lot about what you do. Like your identity now, you know? And I'm just deeply curious about all of it. So we see that there is some serious damage that McClaren has survived, but he has internal hemorrhaging. A couple of his organs are going to need to be replaced. At least one, maybe two. And they are not totally sure, even with the advancements that they have made, whether they're going to be able to save him or not. What they wind up doing And guys, I cannot handle this. What they wind up doing is they have I'm going to call it like a seed. It's a biological, like, nano dealie that that's inside of McClaren repairing him. But then there's also a sort of like, I don't know if this is also nanos, but they drop something onto Trevor's skin that goes right through, and it begins to grow an organ inside of him. And it takes several hours for this to happen. Not as many hours as you'd think, though. And it's really hard on Trevor. It's clearly painful, really painful. And he is like sweating and kind of almost hallucinating or just babbling. Like, he is in bad shape by the time they have to hold him down. And like, apparently this thing just makes its way out of his body. Like, they don't have to cut him open at all. They don't cut him open to drop the nanos in. They don't cut him to get the organ out. It just comes out, which is just the worst thing I've ever heard, ever. But evidently it results in a fully functioning organ that they can then replace McClaren's with, which I don't remember what organ it was that they were replacing. Was it his heart? But there is something like, this is a big deal that they can do this, and it's bonkers, and that opens up a lot of possibilities for things. So we go to Kathryn waking up. It's weird, guys. I don't know what it is about this actress, but depending on the angle she's filmed from, she looks very different. There are some scenes in which she looks really stunning. And then there's a couple times where the bridge of her nose is like almost the same length all the way down, and it makes her look like a cartoon character a little bit, or like an 8-bit generated character. And I kept on being really surprised whenever she was like dead on with the camera, how different she looked than when she's filmed at angles. I was just like always thrown off by it. She's waking up. It's like 7:45 in the morning. McClaren's not even home. And she's looking down at the fact that she's like naked. And it's clear she doesn't remember anything. She comes downstairs in her robe looking for McClaren, not knowing what happened, comes into the kitchen, and you see her like have this moment of seeing everything out and wondering what the hell happened and not remembering any of it. And it's tough. I do not like seeing her get tricked like this. And she pulls her phone out and is texting him to try and figure out where he is. And they text her back that he's with his partner. And meanwhile, they're texting his partner that he is with her. So the two of them wind up connecting and finding out that they've each been lied to. Now, I want to mention, I don't know what exactly they did to cover up other parts of this, but Kathryn has purchased plane tickets and driven to the airport, I assume. Where's her car? What about the charges on her credit card for the plane tickets? What about the email confirmations from the airline when she booked the flight? What about any texts that she sent to anybody else telling them that she's going to be gone a couple days? Emails sent to clients. There is a lot that goes into traveling, and we don't see them dealing with any of that. And while I trust that they thought of this stuff, I really would have felt a bit more reassured if I had heard them mention it or seen it happen, because I waited all episode for her to come across something that they forgot about. Because if she didn't drive to the airport, then she took an Uber or got a taxi or something. that's going to show up on her phone history. There are all sorts of little things that can pop up. What does she have? Like the boarding pass? I guess she wouldn't, because that was probably in her stuff on the plane. I don't know how her purse is still there, because I would assume that that was also still on the plane, but I guess she carried that with her to the back. There's just, she's going to notice that like clothing is missing, because that was going to be in her checked bag. Or if she didn't have a checked bag in her overnight bag, there's going to be like toothbrush, face wash, all of that stuff's going to be missing. So while I am willing to suspend my disbelief that they were able to hide a lot from her, I really would have liked this sort of thing be noticed. And I'm holding out hope that maybe later there will be a thing or two that pops up that she's kind of like, wait, what? We'll see. I could be really overanalyzing this and making too much of it, but they are doing a lot this episode to point out all the details that they have to cover. And when you point out certain details, you can't be choosy, because I'm going to follow that line of thought to the rest of the details and start to notice other ones that you apparently didn't, or you're just not going to mention. So long story short, I waited this whole episode for her to find the smoking gun that points to something else happened last night. And it never really comes up. She's just left knowing in her gut something else happened, but there's no real evidence of it. And I feel bad for her with that, because like that's a shitty place to be, to feel in your bones that this is not what it looks like. And there is no reason for anybody to believe you, like there's nothing for you to point to be like, see? So yeah, she's texting him and is just like, what happened last night? How much wine did we drink? And we see Philip texting her back. Me, not so much. You, however, were in rare form. Forbes and I are on, and we go away at that point, but obviously he's giving her something to like kind of hold her off. I would love to know if rare form is a thing that McClaren would ever actually say to her, because it's the sort of thing, and again, this is just the subtlety of personality. It would be interesting to me to know if there are verbal tics that he has picked up that are new. Things that, he never used to say because Rashawn and I did an episode of Unsober on language, and there are some sayings just like one state away that I have never heard in my life. Like apparently the saying in a lot of states when it's raining but the sun is shining, people will say the devil is beating his wife, which I don't even know what that means, and I've never heard that ever in my whole life. But that's like such a thing that it made it onto a survey about language. And can you imagine if you're with a partner for like 15 years and they just come out with something like that they've never said ever, and you were just standing there like, who are you? And if a traveler has an accent, does that accent come through on their, like in the body that they get into, or does that matter? I don't know. Anyway, getting off on this. So they are leaving the nanobites to do their work while they're dealing with Trevor and installing this organ into him. And Philip has to go to the airport because McClaren's car is still there. And meanwhile, Marcy decides that she's going to participate in the operation, says that she's scrubbing in. The doctor kind of tells her like that she doesn't need to do that. And she's like, I'm not asking your permission. He's my partner. Hi. And we see Philip, and Philip just does not look reputable. Let's be honest. He's somebody that like you see him driving off in an expensive car like this and you're going to be like, wait, what? He sets the car alarm off at first. So that's not a good look. And then when he finally like is trying to leave, security stops him and they want to see his license. They want to see the registration for the car. And when he claims that it's his friend's, they say that he read that name on the registration. This leads to poor Philip beating the hell out of the security guard, dropping him, and then telling the other one to just open the gate. And I was really surprised that apparently the other one did open the gate. I was just like, how does that work? What? Now, what winds up happening is Forbes checks in on the security camera that's apparently installed inside the car. And they are able to see Philip is in the driver's seat. I don't know if he does a GPS tag and sees that the car had been at the airport, but it doesn't seem like that came up, like that was even an issue. And then we get the real meat of this episode, which is going into McClaren's memories of moving into the house with his wife. And we have the house with drop cloths all over everything. She's obviously like painting certain rooms. He's trying to vacuum and get things set up. And something clogged up the vacuum, and it turns out to be a pair of her panties that were underneath the couch. And, you know, this all points to these two are very close and have sex a lot and have a very healthy, active relationship with each other. And it's honestly really sweet. And you get the sense right away when you meet them in the beginning anyway. And then we go to McClaren, and it's obviously a whole separate thing, but is connected to like whatever's going on in his mind right now, where he's like down in this pit and there's a ladder and a light shining at the top of this pit, and he climbs up out of there. So I feel like this is a metaphor for him, like trying to come back, like trying to like cling to life here. So we see another memory, and he's in the car with Kathryn, and they're on vacation. They're driving like a Jeep with the top down. The sun is shining. And he's talking about how he isn't sure that the FBI is what he wants to do with his life. Like his father was a cop, and he kind of feels like he just did this because he doesn't have much imagination. And he feels like maybe there is something that he could be doing that he hasn't spotted yet. And she sort of carefully is like, maybe you just need a new challenge that doesn't have anything to do with work. And he immediately is like, oh, we're going to have the baby talk again. And they're pretty good natured about it. But she's like, I didn't even say that. And he's like, yeah, but I know what you're starting. And they get a flat. And we see this really sweet scene of her handling the flat and him just like basically standing by uselessly, watching her as she puts her hair up and just basically is very sexy. And he is in awe a little bit of how capable she is. And it's like, that's just a real thing in relationships where you'll just have a moment where you're looking at the person you're with and you're like, oh my God, wow, you're great. And they don't know almost ever that you just had one of those moments. It's usually happening without their awareness. But it's really sweet. He's like, hands her the thing and she says, thanks. And he says, yeah, clearly you would be lost without me. And she stops and looks at him and she says, I really would, Grant. And like is dead ass serious. And it's super, super sweet. And that's the end of that memory. And intermittent throughout all of this is us watching everybody else dealing with what is happening on the outside. So there's an interruption in the middle of this one after they get the flat tire where we go back to Marcy talking to Carly about how McClaren's doing. And she is saying, you know, all of these different medical terms. And Carly is just like, can you not? I just want to know, how does it look? Is he going to make it? And Marcy's just like, we have hardly even started. I really can't say. It's too soon. So after the end of the vacation memory, we go back to the office, and Forbes is just starting to figure out that there is something going on, that, McClaren's not answering his phone. He is texting, trying to figure out where he is. And McClaren texts back that he's at the bank, but Forbes is clearly something's not right here. And then he does a GPS trace on the car, but by then it's not by the airport anymore, so it doesn't look suspicious anymore. I don't know if they ever go and look at the history of the GPS, and see that he had been at the airport. But once he realizes this, he, because he can't get a hold of McClaren, calls Kathryn's phone and asks, is McClaren there? And she's like, no, he told me he was with you. And then when he realizes his mistake, he hangs up really abruptly, and she's like, wait a second. And she winds up going down to the office later to talk to him, because now there's too many things happening that don't make sense to her. So Philip dumps the car in this alley, and he has to get a extraction, because he is going to be left here, on foot, trying to avoid getting run down by the cops. And I'm just really curious about why, because we go from here to Trevor and him struggling with this organ being grown in him, and he doesn't want to take any drugs for the pain. I don't really know if he has a problem with drugs or something, because he's very resistant to it. And I'm just dude, you are, taking on the growth of a new organ. Having some drugs for the pain does not seem like it would be out of line. I think that should be fine. We do see later that certain things are, quote, only by directive, like the nanotechnology. So maybe if he asked, they'd have just denied him. I don't know. But as of how it looked, it just seemed like Trevor being stubborn about it for whatever reason. So then we go back into McClaren's memories, and he is showing Kat how to shoot. And they are at the gun range, and she is being very playful and flirty and everything. And it's just so funny, honestly. And they wind up making out, and it's just a moment of just intensity between them. Cut back to FBI, and Forbes has gotten the printout of Philip's face and brings it over to one of the secretaries. I don't know what her, assistants, and asks her to ID this guy. And she says, oh no, I don't need to go figure this out. I know who that is. That's Philip Pearson. Your partner had me run him a few weeks ago. And she says that McClaren got all aggro about it. I do not remember this, but I believe her. And he's left sitting there well, what the fuck? This kid that he knows apparently has taken his car. How does this make any sense? So back into memories, and McClaren is walking through what looks like abandoned factory or something. There's just a bunch of pipes, and it's very sort of, what's the word I want? The look of his surroundings is very industrial. And he's walking, and he hears something behind him, and he turns around, and where there had just been hallway, now there's a door. So he goes through that, and all of a sudden we're in another memory of him obviously in a rush in the morning. He's got coffee. He's trying to tie his tie. And Kat suddenly says, I'm starting to worry that we're going to regret not having children. And he says, are you having actual regret or just the fear of having regret? And she says, the fear one, I think. What about you? And he doesn't want to talk about it. And she's like, dude, we haven't talked about it in a long time. And we're getting older now. If we want to do this, we're going to have to decide to do this pretty soon. And he's got this look on his face. And it turns out they'd already tried once, which we didn't know. He says, I think you're forgetting how hard it was for us. And she says, you mean for me? And he says, well, it took us a long time to climb out of it. And she says, I know. But when you see it later, it's very different than hearing this now, you know? He's talking about doing 60-hour weeks. And this is one of those things that, like, I always, because I just follow this pattern, get involved with men who are kind of workaholics. I think it's because they, you know, I am also a workaholic. And so I am attracted to people who have the same sorts of values and priorities as me. And there is, like, I always wonder how people who have jobs like that manage to raise kids, where everything is unpredictable, where they're called in at the last second, where they just like have to be out for 10, 12 hours at a time. And I do not blame him for bringing that up. It's easy to make it sound like an excuse in the moment, but that is a very real practical concern. You can't just decide, I'm not doing the overtime anymore, if you work at a job where that is an expectation. They don't care about your personal life. They don't. Like, you either have to change jobs or change positions within whatever, you know, capacity you're working. And he sits down with her and says, I'm afraid that if it happened again, and she just interrupts him and sort of seems to like accept what he's saying here. But it's clear she's having a really hard time with this, like, sort of it's not even an ultimatum. It's just her realizing that he doesn't have the concern about it that she does. She's thinking, are we going to regret it? And that's just not the page that he's on. He doesn't seem worried about regret from having. He seems, or from not having. He seems like he's worried about regret from attempting to do it again. Which is much easier to avoid, you know, just don't try again. So back with inside of like McClaren's brain, there's a phone ringing, but then we jump to the FBI office. They have found McClaren's SUV, and they like drive over there to try and track it down. And this is when, Carly gets involved and like blocks them to buy a little bit of extra time. Like the whole thing is really something. And let's see, where do we go from here? Oh, right. We go to the fucking scene where Trevor is in the bathroom and he lifts his shirt and you see this fucking thing. Oh my God, you guys, it's so horrifying. I think it is a heart. It's about the right size and shape. But fuck if that isn't like the most disturbing thing. And it's like moving because it's still growing. I just hate it. I hate it so much. So we then go into another one of McClaren's memories where he has been called into work. And guys, again, having been with workaholics, this is really hard. Because you know that they can't help it. He's called in when they were supposed to have the day together. And you know that they can't help it, that they don't want to go. And you know that a lot of times they are making the majority of the money out of the two of you. They are the ones that are making the home you live in possible. But you can't help but have this like anger about it when it happens, you know? Owen gets called in constantly. Like when he tells me he's done for the day and it's still early in the day, I never believe him. If it turns out to be true, lovely. But it's just like the default now is to simply take that with a grain of salt. He tells me he's done and I interpret that as hopefully. I think I'm hopefully done for the day. We'll see. On his days off, he'll get called in all the time, you know, because it's a family-owned business and people call out. People are unreliable. And every time somebody does, he has to cover it. There's like one other guy that he can ask sometimes, but mostly it has to be him. And her reaction here is exactly how mine is, where it's like, you know, it's not their fault. And you know that they are the one making the most of the money, but you don't want them to be available the way they are. Her telling him you could just not answer your phone for once. That's exactly the thought that's crossed my mind with Owen many times. Just don't answer it. And when you have certain kinds of jobs, that's not an option. You don't get to just not be available. You know, like sure, accidents happen, but and you can like argue, oh, it was an accident, my phone died, whatever, but you'll pay for that accident. You don't just get to say, oh, sorry, I didn't have my phone, and then they just like let it go. That shit comes up and they hold it against you, and it just, that's not usually an option. So this is just a really, it's hard to watch because it's such a familiar argument that does not have an easy answer. And when you are living in a beautiful home that you can really only afford because of your partner's job, you realize as you're saying that you're not being fair, but you can't help but feel like, but I'm here for you, not for the house. Like, you know, Agnes is saying, I think Kathryn would probably have to get a job. Kids are expensive. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, it's unclear about Kathryn's job. I am assuming that Kathryn doesn't make much with the hobby that she has. She calls them like corporate clients, so I'm assuming she makes some money, but it definitely seems like a hobby more than a job. But anyway, so this little argument is tough to watch. When we go to them sweeping the car, Kathryn is with Forbes at this point, and he's noting that it doesn't look like there was any struggle or anything like that. And Kathryn tells him the weird thing is that it doesn't feel completely unexpected. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, I found myself questioning things that I thought held no mystery, like my husband. And she says, maybe I'm losing my mind. And he's like, no, I've been noticing things too. Like all of a sudden, he's a much better shot. And she says, he's much better at a lot of things. Which I was like, oh, damn. Because I had said to you guys, when they were having sex, people have sex differently. Like their moves, their whole vibe during sex, it will be very different from one person to another. So whether he's in the same body is irrelevant. The way he has sex is probably going to be very distinct. And apparently I was right. And he's way better. Which I'm just like, there's something like kind of cold-blooded about that, about having this dude who replaced her husband, and she doesn't even know it, be like way better in bed than her husband was, which I'm just like, wow. And that seems to be what had motivated her to like, you know, call her mom and be like, he's definitely having an affair, because I think she thinks he's turned up his skill level because he's been getting practice with somebody who's demanding other things of him and showing him other ways to do things. And she feels like that's the only way that he could suddenly be having sex in a totally different manner all of a sudden, which makes sense because what else would you think? That he's just discovered a whole new genre of porn and has been learning from that? Like, you know, porn is not an instructional guide, guys, just so you know. So there was something about that I just found really funny and just kind of like, oh, damn. And yeah, the whole thing is just an odd conversation because there's no explanation that the two of them could ever hear that would make sense. And she tells him about the whole like party thing and not remembering any of it, that she isn't somebody who gets so drunk that she blacks out ever. And I'll say for myself, same thing. If I woke up, didn't remember things, there's an evidence of a party, I would be highly suspicious. The last time I got drunk and blacked out was the first time I ever got drunk. And I just didn't know my own limits. And I blacked out and then never did it again because I was like, that's terrifying. Oh my God, I hate that. And you know yourself and you know your own limits and the way that you handle things. And just being told that you just drank until you blacked out when that's not a thing, you know better, you know? But again, what other explanation makes sense? So then we cut to one of the most painful memories, which is McClaren packing up stuff in the nursery. And she comes across him and is like, why are you doing this? And he says, I'm not sure how healthy it is to leave all of this stuff out. And she says, well, you did voice doubts about setting up the nursery before the baby was born. You're going to throw that in my face too? And his reaction is just, no, come on. And that's just such good acting and writing for me because that's the correct reaction. Obviously, she's angry. Obviously, she's upset and she's hurt at the fact that he doesn't seem to be on the same page as her. But he isn't rising to the bait of being like, throw it in your face. He's just saying, come on, like, don't do this. You know, that's what this isn't about. Like, that's not fair. And she's telling him to just leave it. I want to deal with it. And eventually it gets to this point of her saying, why aren't we going to try again? Is that it? Is it over? And her acting in that moment is really good because she's trying to just ask the question. She's trying to just ask. But it's obvious, like, this heartbreak underneath it, that when the words come out of her mouth, she can't help but, like, this desperation and fear is coming out with it that she can't help. And he says, every time we pass this room, you stand and stare. And I think even though you used to do it before, it meant something different before you lost the baby. And she says, before we lost the baby, this isn't just something that happened to me. And he says, you're absolutely right about that. Because I almost lost you. And finding out that we had lost the baby was terrible. But thinking about maybe losing you was so much worse. And I loved the interaction between the two of them here. And I'm sorry if that makes me a selfish asshole, but yeah, I'm going to put a few things away. And I really have to admit that my estimation of McClaren in general went up at this scene. Because there are, unfortunately, a lot of men out there who would not take this position on it. You would think there would be, but it's really shocking when you get right down to it. How many people get married because it's a means to an end, and that end is like this idea of what their life should be, and not because they are really totally in love with the person they're with. And there are men who expect children as part of the package deal. And whether their wife is at risk isn't nearly as much of a factor as you would think it is. And this is part of what's so dangerous about wanting to regulate abortions. Because without abortions, many, many more women would die in childbirth. Frequently, that is something that is done when a woman's life is in danger at the end of a term, and she wanted that baby. And they have a nursery set up, and they've picked a name, and they are ready. And then something goes wrong. And I have more than one friend whose cousin was pregnant and they were having significant problems. They were advised to abort. They didn't because they did not believe in it. And the woman died and left behind 3 children. And you can't tell me that's better. Like, what? Are you serious? And the people in her community were like fine with the fact that she died. That in their mind was the will of God. And they like even had like a ceremony to kind of honor the fact that she was not willing, basically they frame it as she gave up her life for her child, which is such a bullshit way to frame this whole thing. So this scene for me, I just loved it. You know, you just see so much here about the way that they each feel and how for her, this baby means something that it just doesn't to him because she means that to him. And that's not to say that she doesn't love him as much as he loves her. They just are different in what they want. I wish that they floated adoption as an option because I frequently get frustrated at storylines where that's treated as if it's not even an available option. These people are white and wealthy. They could get an adoption, no problem. But I understand for some people that doesn't have the same sort of appeal. It's just really like, you know, for me, I don't want children, But if I ever decided that I did want to have them after all, I would absolutely choose fostering or adopting over having a child. Like, there are too many kids out there, guys, already. Like, they need help. And if you can help them, just go ahead, you know? So after that memory, we see him, like, again, climbing up another ladder. And he comes out and sees Kathryn. And she's like an aspect of himself, really. And she tells him that these are memories that were left that he only gets access to because of the fact that he is near death. And the ones that he saw were some of the brightest memories. And that's why they remain. But she has to remind him, you didn't love me. He did. And they're his memories, not yours. And he wants to see more. And she's like, there aren't any more. And when she tells him they're not your memories, he says, then why can't I tell the difference? And I think that'll be really interesting because he is going to be in love with both his wife and Carly now because of this like deep connection that he has to these memories that aren't even his. They're going to feel like his. They're going to feel real. And now there's going to be this weird thing where Carly, who I still believe has feelings for, there's going to be a distance there that is inevitable because he's living with the other woman. He, you know, like, and Carly, for her part, has this child that she has grown attached to despite any, like, you know, remember her first episode when she shows up and how she looks at the kid like, oh God. And now she's fighting to keep him safe from his abusive dad and really has a fucking serious reaction when he's threatened. And things are changing. You know? So we see the surgery and the heart transplant and everything. And then we see fucking, Forbes figuring out by using GPS, like tracking over the past few weeks, figuring out that McClaren has been going to this one location at this one warehouse over and over again. And he begins to head out there, and Philip's like, I can slow them down a little bit, but only by a few hours. Like, there's not a whole lot that I can do. That really got me panicking because I was just like, I don't know what the hell they're going to do. Are they going to have to like work on him while they're riding in a fucking back of an ambulance? But it turns out that there is enough time for them to finish the operation. It's just really, it's rough. So we see McClaren saying goodbye to Kat, and it's just a very touching moment. Like, the two of them have really good chemistry, honestly. And we see him coming back up into life as Forbes is driving around trying to pinpoint what the fuck is going on. And then Forbes comes to this warehouse, and I can't get over this, guys, how close together this is. Marcy is under a car, just behaving like a fucking mechanic. And Forbes is poking around, asking to see Philip Pearson. And she at first tries to pretend she doesn't even know who he is. He shows ID, and she brings him back there. And there is fucking McClaren, sitting on Philip's desk, awake and talking and dressed, sitting. Granted, he's not standing, but still. And the explanation here is that Philip is one of his like contacts that McClaren promised to keep him out of the system if he promised to stop breaking the law, and that Philip has hacked his phone and stolen his car in order to prove that the FBI is vulnerable and that he should be employed to help them tighten up some of the big empty holes that he was able to get in through. It's thin, but it works pretty well because McClaren is like, well, first Forbes says, I fucking called you, like, you haven't responded, you haven't told me anything. And McClaren says, I texted you like 3 times. And Philip cuts in and says, oh, yeah, I redirected those texts. Sorry. Like, they really have it kind of covered here in terms of it being feasible. I don't know about how much, if you poke at it, it holds up. But for now, it seems to be mostly Forbes being annoyed at McClaren and not really knowing what to make of this entire situation. It's hard to watch the doubt on his face that you know is coming from a genuine place. But there isn't any way to see through to what's actually happening here. Nothing that I could come up with if somebody told me the story would ever make any sense. So yeah, he says you went offline and your car was stolen. The entire cavalry is out looking for you. Yeah, this whole thing, I'm really worried about Philip because like now his face is out there in a way that it hadn't been and associated with hacking. And I'm like, is he going to like start running into roadblocks and stuff here? Meanwhile, in the closet, the fucking utility closet, they're having to sew up the fucking gash in Trevor's abdomen that they took because they couldn't finish things where they were supposed to. It's just a disaster. Yeah, Forbes is just obviously really mad at McClaren. And he's trying to keep it under control, but you can see it. Like, he's just pissed. And McClaren says something about, I'll make it up to you. And Forbes says, it's not me you have to worry about. And McClaren starts to stand up and follows him, but the door slams. And then McClaren begins to collapse. It is a pretty bad scene. The fact that he was even sitting up is like astounding. I mean, this is just, yeah, you have to rest for at least 2 more hours and no sexual activity for the next 36 hours. Yeah, this is gonna take some explaining. I'm real curious about what the fuck is going to happen next because Kathryn, when he gets home, she's not interested. She does not want to hear it. You know, he's trying to be charming because he has these new memories, you know? So for him, he's like freshly in love with her and she's not feeling any of that. Remember that she had these suspicions he was cheating and they were like kind of put to rest when she sees on the plane that he isn't with a woman after all, that he's actually working. But now she doesn't remember that part. She doesn't remember that her fears were put to rest. All she remembers is that there's like some fucking suspicions that she had, plus all of the shit that's been done to her that doesn't make sense. So now it's like taking a more sinister tone. If Kathryn wrote into Reddit asking like, here's what happened, what do you guys think? I would tell her to fucking run. I would assume that her husband was drugging her, that something weird was going on. You know, like I would be very concerned for her. So, you know, yeah. So finally McClaren is shaking the hand of the doctor, before they go to save this genocidal dictator, evidently. I really enjoyed Trevor just being like, can you fucking fix me up? 'Cause I have school tomorrow, dude. And he's like, sorry, but no. And the doctor goes and talks to Marcy and tells her if there's anything we could do for you, which I appreciated that being mentioned because it didn't occur to me, but I would have thought if anybody could fix whatever's going on with her, it would be people with like that kind of advanced technology. And evidently it's beyond them as well, which is rough. You know, I don't know what happens then. But you see, Marcy is like struggling, you know, she knows that that's it. And she doesn't have many options open to her. And also, I don't know how much everybody else knew that she was dying, but now that he said this in front of everybody, they all will, you know? So yeah, the episode ends with Kathryn closing the bathroom door in McClaren's face. And that's the end of the episode. And I am just like really sad for her because it's just, I don't know. You know, I don't know. I just feel bad for her, man. She deserves better. And she's just inadvertently in this garbage situation. And I like her despite myself, you know, privileged white woman with a lot of money and who has like kind of a life of leisure. You wouldn't think that I could muster this kind of sympathy, but there it is. So I think that's it. Is there anything else? I'm trying to think if there was something that I missed, but I think I covered most of it. So yeah, thank you again to Michael very much for commissioning this episode. And thank you to all of you for listening. I hope you've been enjoying it, and I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.